and that by mid-century, our hottest annual temperatures will increase another 4 to 8 degrees, while our coldest annual temperatures will increase a full 10 degrees. Our state's changing climate is not just a matter of numbers and degrees. Increasing temperatures are already affecting our quality of life. Changing animal patterns, particularly the die-off of pre-spawn salmon, are affecting hunters and fishers, hitting people who rely on subsistence practices the hardest. Our changing climate will also severely impact our infrastructure. According to the National Climate Assessment, the cost of infrastructure damage in Alaska from a warming climate is projected to be very large, ranging from $110 to $270 million per year. While municipalities and boroughs throughout the state, including Anchorage, have developed and adopted comprehensive plans to mitigate and adapt to the effects of our changing climate, action at the statewide level has been minimal. Our state legislature has acted twice on our changing climate, once in 1990 and again in 2006, nearly 30 and 15 years ago. The more recent legislation, HCR 30, established a temporary commission that assessed the impacts and costs of climate change to Alaska and developed recommendations for preventative measures. The commission filed this report in 2008. The executive branch has also taken several steps to address our changing climate. In 2007, Governor Palin established a climate change sub-cabinet that advised the governor on the preparation and implementation of an Alaska climate change strategy. The sub-cabinet did indeed prepare a strategy, and in 2008, the Department of Commerce, Community, and Economic Development established 2 programs: the Alaska Climate Change Impact Mitigation Program and the Coastal Impact Assistance Program. Both programs provide technical assistance and funding to communities. In spite of this work, the sub-cabinet has disbanded in 2011 by Governor Parnell. In 2017, Governor Walker established the Climate Action for Alaska Leadership Team, which identified appropriate climate change priorities, goals, and metrics. The team submitted an action plan with recommendations to the governor in September 2018. Governor Dunleavy disbanded the Climate Action for Alaska Leadership Team via executive order this February. Currently, Representative Josephson has introduced H.R. 12, a resolution that would establish a House Special Committee on Climate Change. The resolution has been referred to the House Resource Committee. If passed, the House Special Committee on Climate Change would meet until the next legislative session begins and would be terminated. As it is a House resolution, H.R. 12 would only need to pass the House. It would not need Senate or executive approval. According to the text of the bill, the special committee would be established to ensure advancement and understanding of current climate research and to explore policy options relating to climate change effects, mitigation, resilience, and adaptation in the state. Clearly, our states will continue to face extreme weather patterns that will affect our quality of life in Alaska. By most accounts, the situation will get worse. Temperatures will continue to rise, and we will face significant infrastructure costs. In spite of all this, action at the state level has been minimal. Legislation related to our changing climate are old and out of date. Administrative orders have been rescinded by successive administrations. There's at least one piece of legislation in the House, H.R. 12, that tackles our changing climate. As we move into yet another unseasonably warm winter, it is increasingly clear that we need to act on our climate now more than ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Travis. We've committed to ending this meeting in 1 hour. We have 20 minutes for public testimony to our legislators. And to assure that there is time for all who wish to provide testimony, we ask that you limit your remarks to 1 minute and focus your comments on the changing climate. If you'd like to provide testimony, you may now form a line coming up toward the podium. Please identify yourself and speak closely into the mic. We'll provide you with a 15-second warning. If you haven't finished within that time, we'll remind you to stop by ringing the bell. For the rest of us, if we'd like to take notes, there is some space provided in the agenda.
Thank you. My name is Helen Wienhauser. Up until recently, I viewed climate change as a problem, not an emergency. But then on November 5th, I heard the newscaster say, over 11,000 scientists have declared climate change an emergency now. I sat there stunned. Now, I'm seriously afraid. First, I'm very afraid of fire caused by climate change. My emotional and spiritual home is our cabin off the road system in the Matsu Valley, not that far from where the fires were this summer. This is where I go to be connected to Alaska's mountains and wilderness, the reason I moved to Alaska. But more than that, I am afraid for the world my children and grandchildren are inheriting. My grandchildren could live into the 2080s, at which point most of the world will be uninhabitable unless we act now. What kind of lives will they have? Will they even have children? And I'm afraid because we have to change how we live now. And I think most people are not future-oriented and not willing to change. Please prove me wrong.
Thank you, Helen.
So, I find it very disturbing what has been happening, and I am pretty scared because of all the ice melt and there could be flooding, which and if it keeps on, that could stop wildfires, which are also so bad, but it is also making animals and people lose homes. And I really like having fun at winter, which I do if it keeps on, and I would like something to happen about this, and okay, I think that's pretty much it.
Thank you very much.
I'm Bill Sherwan. I'm a writer, and I wrote some stuff down because 60 seconds, it's hard enough to put thoughts together. So I'm going to give you some written testimony. I'll briefly try to say two things that make me really sad that I experienced this year. One is the loss of spruce trees throughout Anchorage other than Turnigan. In my neighborhood has been hammered, and 3 beautiful spruce trees have been taken out. And as you know, I'm sure the spruce trees are made more susceptible to the bark beetle outbreak because of the weather we've been experiencing. The other thing is I had the opportunity to go up down the Arctic coast and spend time in the company of polar bears. And it was an incredible experience, but as a friend said, it was a bittersweet experience. Because the polar bears we were spending time with are basically stranded on land because of the extreme melting of the polar ice. And there's a good chance that the Beaufort Sea population of polar bears will be extinct. There are predictions that will be extinct by 2040.
Thank you, Bill.
My name is Christina Talbot, and for the record, the young man who just spoke was my son, Kevin Talbot. I've lived here for almost 40 years. I've seen the glaciers retreat. I've seen the changes in the past patterns of the citizens. I'm worried for my state, for our way of life, for the people who depend on the land and the animals. I'm worried for my kids, for the life they're going to inherit, for the social instability, for the damage to the land, to the water, to the rest of the world that they're going to have to deal with. I would like the legislature to speak out about this problem. I would like the legislature to encourage the governor to speak out on the federal level because we need action at all levels. And I want the state to look at revenue that is not extraction-based because we've got to change over to something that won't continue to make this problem worse. And explore not just fixing the problems, but finding new ways to go forward. We need alternatives for heating, we need alternatives for travel for this state to get from place to place. We need to look forward to fix the problem, but also to pioneer new ways that we can live.
Thank you.
So my assumption, sorry, I'm very short. My assumption was that most people would be talking about snow or about wildlife. So I wanted to talk about the fires that have been happening. Summer was really hot, and then I'm a teacher. Well, the first week of school, it was so smoky that we couldn't let the kids go out to recess. So they didn't get to let out any energy. And on top of that, you know, I was watching them walk around the hallways, rubbing their eyes because the smoke was hurting them and complaining that they had headaches or sore throats and felt sick. And they're some of the most susceptible to this smoke. And it was really disturbing to me how bad the fires got this year because it's so dry and so warm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is George Reinier. I live in Eagle River. I moved there 52 years ago and raised my family there. When we first came to Eagle River, we commonly, in the summertime, hiked up Meadow Creek, which flows down the mountains into Eagle River. And up at the headwaters of Meadow Creek, we picked blueberries. And at that time, the blueberries were low to the ground, easy to find, but lately they've been surrounded by heavy, woody plants consistent with the increase in temperature in that area, quite consistent with the climate change that we read about. We read about climate change, we see pictures of the sea ice, things like that, but it doesn't quite hit home like trying to see the face of Portage Glacier now, when it used to be that I could skate down to it in the winter and see the visitor center from the face of the glacier. We pride ourselves in being in the last frontier. The truth of the matter is, we are in the first frontier when it comes to climate change. And I plead with you to let us be in the first frontier when it comes to climate change abatement.
Thank you, George.
And a couple of years ago, I was looking through it and I saw pictures of mountain glaciers. It gave me nightmares that would wake me up. I have also found out that there are now over 41,000 species of animals on endangered species lists, some of them from climate change. Let's try to stop climate change.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sophie Tidler. How climate change has affected me in a 1-minute spiel is quite hilarious. I'll be speaking on one very specific thing that I feel a huge sense of urgency in seeking a path forward. The erosion of Alaskan village landfills into oceans and waterways. Shishmaref is one of many Alaskan coastal communities eroding away due to the lack of sea ice protection caused by climate change. The acceleration of erosion has exposed the old landfill and is actively threatening their existing one. I'm here to ask in your focus on this. It is our ancestral responsibility. This is not the Alaska I know, nor is it nor will it be the Alaska I accept, and I trust that you will not accept this either. I ask that you please read through the Waste Erosion Assessment and Review, also known as the WEAR, the WARE Final Report, that was put out by ADEC in 2015, and work together on cleaning the state. Thank you.
My name is Rowan. Walruses. Most people talk about big groups of animals, but I'm talking about one specific species, walruses. Walruses are affected by climate change. Pregnant walruses need to find stable ice floes to raise their kids. The heating of the earth is melting the ice floes, making them unstable or just making them disappear completely. Walruses also need ice floes to protect them from their predators. These are the reasons I disapprove of climate change and think we should do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rowan.
Good evening. My name is Hunter Dill. This is one of my favorite times of year. It gives me a sense of nostalgia. I grew up remembering days of clear, deep, cold nights. And even though I'm relatively young, I can very much see differences in what we see today. I'm an Alaskan native. I grew up in a village in western Alaska. My parents are still there. They still very much live on a subsistence-based lifestyle, and they're very much affected by the changes over the years, changes that we see very rapidly. They gather caribou, moose, fish throughout the year, and the impacts that we see today impact people like my parents. I'm also pilot. The smoke that we saw and the fires that we saw throughout the Kenai Peninsula, Anchorage, and the Matsu Valley, I guarantee you I very much saw that throughout our state this summer. Everywhere that I flew, smoke and fire was everywhere. Alaska is on the forefront. Now's the time to act. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Britt Johnston. It seems to me that, well, it's well known that there are an awful lot of Alaskans that have been deceived into believing that climate change is not created by human activity. And I suppose that those people, along with some others, would object or would resist any of the proposals that we come up with tonight about addressing climate change. Which is a little ironic because whatever we come up with tonight would be far short of what's really necessary. Climate change is an emergency, and our state economy seems to be calibrated in order to make more climate change. We sell a lot of oil, and that's how we maintain our state economy, and we're in the process of lifting the roadless rule down on Congress, which is going to cut down trees precisely at a time when we ought to be planting more trees. So I guess the question we need to ask is, do we want to have a rich economy, or do we want to have a planet?
Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Tom Longish. I'd like to ask each of you legislators whether you'd be willing to sponsor legislation that does the following. Provide for unitary dispatch of all generation systems of 5 megawatts or larger, so that with the mandate to provide for the minimum possible carbon footprint of those generation and storage facilities. 2, to create a renewable portfolio standard that is additive for each 5 years to add the percentage of that year to the renewable portfolio standard. For 5 years, it would be a 5% renewable portfolio standard. In 10 years, it would be a 15%. In 20 years, there would be a 35% RPS. Does anybody concur with the need to sponsor legislation of that sort?
You know, perhaps we could delay the response to that question for a few minutes when our legislators will have a chance to speak.
Hello, my name is Tim Hinterberger. As you're hearing from many of us tonight, ending the production and use of fossil fuels is a moral imperative in itself. But there is also a purely economic reason that Alaska should think very carefully before spending state funds in support of oil infrastructure or exploration. There is already a glut of supply in the world's oil markets, and a surge in production from new supplier countries is expected to add to the glut in the next few years. Now take that and add to it the fact that by 2040, the growing electrification of the passenger vehicle fleet globally will erase a substantial amount of demand from oil consumption. When you have a growing glut of supply and a drop in demand, you know what happens to prices. Sure, you can find industry analysts who will say that oil demand and prices are going to remain steady for decades to come, but it really could go either way. Betting on the continued dominance of oil for Alaska's economy is not a bet we should be making with state funds. I urge the legislature to make serious plans for diversifying the state's economy away from oil and not to allow the industry to take any further tax breaks for investment in oil exploration and infrastructure development. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, good evening. First off, thank you everybody in attendance and elected officials and hosts. My name is Andrew Denny, and I'm going to leave you with 3 S's. Keep it simple. Sustainability, sobriety, and solidarity as ways to combat. For sustainability, more carpooling, produce more food, medicine, and high-value and value-added crops. Reduce, reuse, and recycle more. Secondly, sobriety, enforcing. Texting and driving, I see a lot of people doing that, and more enforcement on that. Our roads are not safe. And then also, in the spirit of the 18th Amendment, let's look at restricting, even banning this hard liquor stuff. That's how the 18th Amendment originally was passed. That's a scourge on our society. And third, I said solidarity. So let's share more, share culture, share time, break bread together, and definitely support our law enforcement. They have a tough job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Murray Crooks. I'm from Sitka, Alaska, and I'd just like to share with you that it's been a few years now since anyone's seen a starfish in Sitka. My dad works on a tugboat, or has worked on tugboats for years, and every year he sees more and more polar bears in the Arctic going up to Utqiagvik, swimming in the open ocean with no land in sight. It was hotter last week in Alaska than many places down south. My wife was doing some training in North Carolina, and she saw snow before I did this week. We've got a problem. We don't necessarily need to point fingers at whose fault it is that we have this climate change problem, but if we don't do anything to make it better, then that's on us. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Mariah Offer. I didn't plan to speak tonight, but I feel compelled, and I want to thank all of you for your time and attention to this crucial issue. I worked as a commercial fisher for years out of Kodiak, and again this past couple summers, as I was traveling on a boat from Kodiak to Prince William Sound, the sun rose red, and I couldn't hardly tell what it was. Halfway between Kodiak and Prince William Sound, it was because of the smoke in my hands. And I also worked during my time off as a fisher and a teacher. I worked with the indigenous community off the Caribbean coast of Panama, donating to the indigenous people there for children living in poverty. And the Goonie Gallup people live on 360 islands that are all sea level, and the water is coming into their homes. So my heart goes out for them. And I want to encourage solidarity with the indigenous communities that are suffering from global warming and ocean rising, and just to encourage Alaskans to unite with indigenous movements in Alaska and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you. And the 2 gentlemen currently in the line will be the last 2 speakers of the night to meet our 20 minutes limitation.
Yeah, my name is Frank Box. I didn't originally plan on speaking tonight, but the spirit moved me And I think that's what we need. We need the spirit to move us, to get up and say something, get up and do something. I've lived in Anchorage, Alaska since 1959. We moved here February 7th, and I remember winters. I was here with, with the earthquake and all that stuff, and the way the communities come together. I know we can come together. I worked on the North Slope. I've seen the waste and things that go on up there. I mean, I didn't know what else to do because I was a welder and I worked up there, and I saw things change. I mean, I used to go running. I went to Service High School, and I remember, junior year at Weldon, on Weldon Road, it was 55 below, and I built the Portage Ptarmigan to split around to see Portage Glacier because the glacier was receding. So anyway, we got to do something. We got to take care of our creation. It's the right thing to do.
Thank you.
We've been talking a lot over the last decade or so about climate change. A lot of people who were aware of this much earlier tried to say something, nothing was heard. It's been called global weirding, it's been called all kinds of things, now it's an emergency. I totally agree. We're not going to fix it. We need to be ready for it. And by that measure, I'd like to say that I would like to see our future goals and aspirations focus on resiliency and adaptation. And the best place that we can look for that right now in our state, in my opinion, is in the Native community. In the rural communities where that is their way of life and has been forever. And I would like to see our financial goals and attention put there because I believe that that is a place that the methods and models can be brought forward to use in the larger communities. Because when it comes right down to it, we're all going to have to change. We're all going to have to adapt. And my no offense, but I want to say to the people that are here with me today, we are going to be able to survive that. We have faith and strength in our community. And that is the thing that will get us through. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all of those of you that shared your thoughts with our representatives. So, good evening again to our three legislators. You have an opportunity to share your thoughts on our changing climate or anything that you heard here tonight. You each have 3 minutes to speak, and we'll start out with Representative Andy Josephson.
Press and hold the button.
All right. Well, I appreciate all the testimony and the opportunity to come here. I'm actually in my district, in my neighborhood, in fact. And I appreciate and very grateful to AFAC for doing this. Let me mention a couple things. The first is the sort of indictment, and I don't mean that like I'm upset about it, it's accurate, but the frustration, I use the word indictment, of the legislature is fair. Geran and I arrived in 2013. We were both elected in the fall of 2012. In my second term, I introduced an Alaska Climate Change Commission bill. And I introduced essentially the same bill in my third term. I'm now in my fourth term. That bill had 2 hammers to work on this. One of them was to increase by a penny the tax for spill prevention and response that's charged for every barrel that comes through TAPS, the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. So it was an ambitious bill, and I say 2 hammers because on the one hand it would have gone to the source, that is the oil industry, and said, this is your product. Granted, everyone in this room uses some of it. We need to talk about that. But this is your product and you're going to contribute to this. The second part was that those dollars, which would have been several $1 million a year, would have funded a climate change commission and office within the executive branch, within the office of the governor, to work on further grant finding and recommendation of legislation to the full legislature, et cetera, et cetera. It was a very ambitious bill. A lot of my bills I'm the author of the wolf buffer bill, as Bill Sherwood knows. We got that through the House. It was never going to get through the whole legislature, but I tend to offer really ambitious bills. Ambitious bills are great. They're great for talking about, but they have difficulty passing. What we had this year was the brainchild of a former legislative staffer, and it's absolutely simple, and its simplicity makes it fairly ingenious. Does it cure the problem? Of course not. But what it does is the HR 12 benefited House Resolution 12, and it just needs one hearing in Representative Tarr's committee, no pressure. She chairs the Resources Committee, but the beauty of this is the House doesn't need to care what the Senate thinks or does or says about this, because it won't go there. Now, the downside of that is we don't get their imprimatur, we don't get their affirmation of the bill. The other thing that's good about this is it doesn't go to Governor Dunleavy. That's a really good thing. Okay. And I'll just wrap up. So the beauty of this is it creates an institution, if it passes, this new special committee, and it'd have to be renewed every 2 years, but it gives this chamber, the House, standing and something authentic to move forward with, to have hearings, do fact-finding, and also write reports. And here's another thing that is fascinating, is she's yielding her time to me. If you're watching TV, you know that. Well, let me just say, the other thing that's fascinating about this is this bill could have, this committee could have bills referred to it. And that's fascinating to me. What bills would the speaker say, I want that special committee to review it? That is very intriguing. So I'll wrap up there.
Thank you very much, Representative Josephson.
Well, thank you so much for everyone who came out tonight and for the opportunity to talk with you for a few minutes. Representative Josephson was mentioning some of our prior legislation. I had put in a bill in 2015, and I just want you to know I stand in solidarity with you in the call for action and, going several years back. So I am lucky, though, to come to the legislature with a science background. A lot of my colleagues don't. And so, part of resistance on some of these issues, I think sometimes is just lack of information, and there is a learning curve, unfortunately. And it's sort of this cruel situation in Alaska where we are low producers in terms of overall impact for climate change, but we are the front line for the impacts of climate change. And I just mentioned that because they're, in working with the co-chair, Representative John Lincoln, who's from Kotzebue, as we address these rural issues in terms of impacts, but also in terms of resource development, there's a recognition that needs to happen in that conversation about the way that has developed those local economies. And, it's something I feel like, we need to all sort of come together and recognize what kind of transition that means, because there are people who want to remain in their rural communities and have seen some of this resource development bring wealth in a way they don't feel like they would have seen otherwise. And it's just been a message that's been carried to me. So it's not, me saying that, but trying to be a good listener. And so, how do we make sure that we have strong rural communities, which have been traditionally the place where the resource development in Alaska has happened, and, remain a place where people can live, and also think about what that means for the larger state economy. So those two things don't always line up, but some opportunities, I think, for that. It came up earlier with the roadless rule. Talking about that right now gives us an opportunity to talk about the economic value of that forest other than for extraction and timber harvest. Gives us an opportunity to talk about tourism as a sustainable opportunity. Talk about it as the value as a carbon sink. If we could figure out how to monetize that rather than the extractive resources, we'd have a new opportunity there. We need to be putting more money into marine research at the state level. That's really gone by the wayside as the budget's been cut. And then a huge impact for climate change is the transportation sector. And this is a super nerdy thing, but I did my master's thesis on energy use in the transportation sector. So if I had more than 3 minutes, we could talk a lot more. But, that's something we fly a lot in Alaska, right? So we all have some responsibility in that. I don't know if we're all buying carbon credits every time we fly. But we need to be thinking about, there's been, for example, cross-country flights with synthetic fuels. And, why aren't we the place where we're developing some of that technology? That's what I think would be very exciting, so we can get out of this paradigm of sort of a battle, defensive posture on one side or the other. Why don't we look at this as an opportunity for innovation, for new ideas, the same kind of thinking it took us to advance here. Let's look at our future and use that same kind of innovative thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Tarr. Representative Merrick.
Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this forum. I did yield my time to Representative Josephson, but I especially want to appreciate those who testified. The passionate testimony, I think, is what's going to elevate this issue to the next level. I especially want to commend the young people that spoke, because this is obviously something that is going to affect them more than us. And for those of us with children and grandchildren, that's why we're doing what we're doing now. And I look forward to some bipartisan conversation about this issue in the upcoming session.
Thank you, Representative Merrick. Don Crandall of the Anchorage Unitarian Universalist Fellowship and Lizzie Newell of St. Mary's Episcopal Church have some clarifying questions for our legislators.
Representative Tarr, tonight we've heard sometimes very... Well, Representative Tarr, I'm coming through finally. Okay, tonight we've heard sometimes passionate testimony from many of our concerned citizens, and so this is clearly an issue that Anchorage residents and citizens are really passionate about, and so you as co-chair of the House Resource Committee, would you commit to hold hearings and move House Resolution 12 as quickly as possible when the session begins?
The agreement that the co-chair and I have is that we make these decisions together. I myself will advocate strongly for hearing this as soon as we start. We'll sign on as a co-sponsor. This one got introduced at the end of session. That's why it didn't get any attention last year. And I will absolutely be pushing for early passage so that we can make good use of our time together in Juneau to actually do the work of the committee. The only thing I can't say without having the co-chair here is I can't speak on his behalf because it's sort of the respect of our relationship. But he and I have talked, and I think he feels the same. But I wouldn't publicly commit him to something, without his permission.
Well, we're really just looking for your commitment. So if you can
Yes.
say what
Yes.
you can do, that would be good.
Representative Merrick, we've heard some testimony of young people, their fears about fires, the flooding, and I understand you share those concerns. Would you discuss HR 12 and what you've heard tonight with colleagues in your caucus?
I'm certainly willing to discuss that with them, as well as the minority members that sit on the House Resources Committee. I'm lucky enough to be neighbors with Representative Josephson both in the Capitol building and in our Finance Committee, so I'm sure he will keep me apprised of what's happening. That's one thing I pride myself on. That's why I came here tonight, is to be open and listen to what may be opposing ideas. And I worked really hard on that this first session, and I plan on doing that the next session as well.
Thank you. So, would you yourself seriously consider supporting House Resolution 12?
I will consider it. I'm not going to make any commitments at this time. I haven't had a chance to fully read the legislation, but like I said, I'm very open-minded, and I have a great relationship with the sponsor. So, I will consider it, and that is something I always do with each piece of legislation.
Thank you.
Representative Josephson, Would you commit to keeping our leadership informed of the status of House Resolution 12 during the next legislative session?
Mr. Crandall, you can count on it. You need to find the nearest telephone and dial Representative Tarr's committee and testify, so you can count on it.
One more question for the three of you. Representatives Tarr, Merrick, and Josephson, will you meet with us in February to discuss the status of H.R. 12? I see affirmative nods from all three of you. Is that correct?
Yes, in fact, we could go one step further. If we can create this special committee, now the Speaker will decide who serves on the committee, but assuming that we have a role in that, we could calendar it if you're coming down and have testimony. But you can expect us to hear from people like Mr. Brett Schneider as well, who was mentioned, and experts in the state on this issue.
So are you saying that you will meet with us in February? That's what you want? Yeah, that's what we're looking for.
I'm just gonna say the easy answer, yes.
I met with folks from your group several weeks ago, and I'm happy to meet with them again in February.
Thank you.
So I've been informed that our sign-in sheets list nearly 200 names of those of you that showed up tonight. As well. Your stories were very moving and insightful. Before we leave this evening, I'd like to assure that we all walk away with the same expectations. So, I heard Representative Tarr said yes to holding hearings and moving House Resolution 12 as quickly as possible when the session begins, and will be eager to meet with us in February. Representative Merrick said yes to discussing H.R. 12 and what you've heard here tonight with your colleagues in caucus, and would seriously consider supporting the House Resolution 12. And Representative Josephson committed to keeping our leadership informed of the status of the resolution during this next session, and that you all did agree to meet with us in February. So, it's tremendous that so many of us here are willing to work together to address the changing climate, the problems that we're having in our state today, and that we can anticipate for the future. And we can make this happen. There is hope out there. As a closing reflection, I invite Bishop Mark Latine of the Episcopal Church of Alaska to present some thoughts to us. One more response.
If folks go to the akledge.gov website, there are just two features I want people to know about. There's a text feature where you can text, so you could put in HR 12 and you receive text messages to let you know when there are hearings and when there's movement, and there's also an email feature. So if anybody wants help with that, please get in touch, because it's an easy way for you to keep in touch with us. And Senator Gray Jackson is in the back.
Thank you. I was asked to give a closing prayer. I am Mark Latine, the Episcopal Bishop, and it is an honor to be with you all in this important work. So if you would join me in prayer. Creator God, breath and source of life, in love you called the world into being, and in grace you made us and call us your children. We stand in awe of the wonder of your creation, its beauty and wildness, complexity and power, resilience and fragility. You call us to be participants in the web and wellspring of life, to be nurtured by the planet, to be nurturing of the planet, to cherish the world and all that lives. But now the whole creation groans under our weight. Forgive us in our brokenness when we have taken too much from the earth, when we have not spoken out against greed and destruction, when we have not allowed our most vulnerable neighbors to be harmed. We seek courage and forgiveness to be made whole. We pray for those people, communities, and nations already suffering the devastating effects of climate change. And we pray for the diversity of this earth, so much of it already threatened by our actions. We pray for our legislators and those in positions of public trust and authority. Bless them with wisdom and creativity and a shared vision of hope for all creation. May they find the determination to take strong action to halt the destructive effects of climate change and the political will to act together for the common good. Creator God, we pray for all of us that we might restore our relationships with each other and work together to heal the earth. Renew us in your grace for the sake of your creation. Amen.
Thank you, Bishop Tini. This public meeting is concluded. We invite all of you to join us in the hall. We hope our legislative 3 representatives and 1 senator can join us. Thank you very much for all of you.